Yeah, and, Stuart, in a memo obtained by NBC News, the Harris campaign says its path to winning Michigan is through the suburbs, with the aim of capitalizing on what it says is Trump's weakness among women and white college-educated voters. Could this be a difference maker?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back to 2016, Hillary Clinton was winning enough of these to win right up until the Comey letter. And after that, it shifted just enough to give Donald Trump this narrow victory, one with 46.1%. These are voters that vote in large numbers and are passionately engaged in this race. And, to say the presidency goes through the suburbs has been a truism for, I don't know, probably since Reagan, if not before. So I think it is a great strength of this campaign. They have the right tone for it. They're not angry. And I just am really impressed by the Harris campaign. They seem to have composure, and they seem to have a balance of confidence and still working as hard as they can and not taking anything for granted.
Yeah, I want to bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who's covering the Trump campaign. Vaughn, maybe different way of describing how the Trump campaign has been going these last couple of weeks? Oh, I think we just lost Vaughn, so let me go to you, Jonathan, if I could. There's another set of numbers from our recent NBC News poll that we want to highlight. 62% of voters believe the upcoming presidential election makes a great deal of difference in their lives and their families' lives. That's the highest share on this poll question dating back to the 1990s. What candidate does this, you think, help?
I would think that this would help Vice President Harris. And I say that because I'm thinking of issues like reproductive health. When it's been talked about in terms of abortion. But when the vice president and Governor Tim Walz are talking about it on the campaign, they talk about it in terms of freedom. And I think that's why we're seeing the conversation not necessarily shift from reproductive freedom to freedom writ large, but also shifting to just the threat that Donald Trump poses. And so with the closing argument being that, it forces, I think, the electorate to think about what exactly does that mean? Does it mean in forcing them to focus on what Donald Trump is saying, whether it's celebrating taking away a woman's right to choose and what that means to families across the country, what it means to say that he is talking about turning the American military on Americans when he's talking about the enemy within. I think as we get closer, we're 18 days out from Election Day, I think people are now, who haven't been focused on it like we are, starting to look and pay attention to what both candidates are saying. And I think that 62% number should inure to the vice president's benefit.
Jonathan, I'm just wondering, when you talk about exactly the concept of freedom and what freedom means, and it certainly means different things to different people, I guess. But, Jonathan, there is the overriding issue of freedom as a whole, freedom to pursue the American dream, freedom to be able to have a job that will be able to maintain your family. Are we, Jonathan, I'm just thinking your thoughts, are we in the United States in 2024 in a position where freedom truly is at stake?
Yes. Also, I would add in that freedom from fear. And what we have right now is the nominee of one party who is all about fear and grievance and division. And you have another candidate from the other party who is trying to broaden the tent to the point where, and I'm talking about Vice President Harris, she has been, as much as she has been asking the Democratic base for their votes, she's also asking Republicans for their votes, where she's campaigning with Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and other Republicans to show that if they give her their votes, she is going to be a president for all Americans. And so that means making it possible for anyone in this country to avail themselves of the freedoms to make decisions over their own bodies and their own health care, the ability, the freedom to pursue their dreams, however they define them. And there's only one candidate, and this is just objectively speaking, only one candidate who is speaking to the hopes and aspirations of the American people, and only one candidate who is speaking to the raw base fears of other people in this country.
And by the way, we're watching a Harris campaign event that's about to get underway. We're seeing on the podium there the governor of Michigan, but there are 6 Democratic governors on that stage as we await the vice president. I understand that we do have Vaughn Hilliard now with us, who is covering the Trump campaign. Vaughn, meanwhile, who is Trump trying to reach with his activities today?
He's actually going to be in Oakland County, Michigan, which is exactly where Vice President Harris is going to be holding a rally later tonight. And Oakland County is one of those suburban counties that's just northwest of Detroit area where Republicans used to have reliable vote share there. And we're talking about, a decade, 2 decades ago. But we have seen this trend in the Trump era towards Democrats. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by about 8 percentage points. And then Joe Biden expanded that margin to 14 percentage points. And you could, when you're looking at it, you could give his victory in 2020 and give that to Oakland County and that margin that he was able to grow. And that's why you see Donald Trump there this afternoon, as well as Vice President Harris, because they understand the significance of getting those suburban, independent, even reticent conservatives, one-time Republicans, to vote for Kamala Harris. But this is all coming at a point in time where, you have a Trump campaign that may target an area, may have a certain message it wants to deliver on. But Donald Trump, as he did this morning while on Fox and Friends, his message veers off course. This morning, he suggested, for instance, that Abraham Lincoln was a great president, though he suggested that he should have settled the differences between the Union and the Confederacy before the Civil War started. Well, of course, there was no follow-up question as to exactly how he would do that, whether that would mean slavery would still have had to exist as part of this supposed settlement. But for Donald Trump, he's just over 2 weeks out here, and he has a slate of campaign events in North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan planned. But at the same time, exactly what this closing message is, it's not very specific, yet that may not be incumbent upon him in order to win this election, because we continue to see polling show him in a strong position. And if his faithful supporters get out there, it's going to be up to Vice President Harris to counter that by building a coalition that is able to win over those suburban voters in the likes of Oakland County, north of Detroit, but also in Detroit proper, and make sure that that Democratic base continues to come out for her.
Hey, Stuart, just thinking about what Vaughn was saying about, the polling. It's when you look at the polling the last couple of cycles, right? 2016, most of it was off. 2020, closer. 2022, the red wave that didn't happen. When we see so many polls that show maybe the same race in the same district or state, totally different, what do we make of this, Stuart?
Yeah, you really should ignore them. There are a lot of junk polls out there. Republicans discovered, and I particularly saw this in 22, that a lot of Republican-focused polls could be flooded into the zone. They would tend to be treated like quality polls, and that would lower the average. So what does that do? That gives Republicans more enthusiasm. It decreases enthusiasm for Democrats. It's really just a form of disinformation. And I think it's really incumbent upon everyone as an individual, also the media, to really separate the quality polls from the others. Personally, I think it's good to pick one poll that's reliable, like Marist is a good poll. And what counts here is the trend. It's like your bathroom scale. It may not be exactly how much you weigh, but you're going to know if you're gaining or losing weight. And the striking thing about this race is Donald Trump's inability to move consistently above 47%. And he won with 46.1%. He lost with 46.9%. So I really am more focused at that number than where Harris is, because Harris's favorable-unfavorable ratio is considerably better than Donald Trump's. And at the end of the day, as we know, we've seen it so many times, those last-minute voters are going to be driven by their favorable and unfavorable views more than anything else, which is just makes sense. Are you really going to wake up in the morning and go vote for somebody you have an unfavorable view of? either not going to vote or you'll skip them on the ballot. So that really was not true in 16 when they both had negative. That was pretty considerable. I think in campaigns we always ask ourselves, would you rather be my campaign or the other campaign? And nothing's a lock here, but I think the Harris campaign has an advantage at every aspect of campaigning here.